Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow.
The Great Fall of China. Today,
ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, good evening, friends. Let me pop on up here. Good evening and welcome to this Monday night, August 24, 2015 edition of Nightcast. There are many concerns in today's news, friends, related to what's going on over in China with their stock market situation there. The slowing of the growth of the Chinese economy is believed to have caused the biggest collapse in global markets for several years. Now, we're going to show you what's happening on global markets around the world. We're going to start with London's FTSE index, which was at one point down by 6%, wiping 100 billion pounds. That's 100 billion, not million, billion pounds off its value. Robert Peston has this opening report.
The Great Fall of China. Today's shares in Shanghai dropped a painful 8.5%, which then knocked over Japan's stock market down 4.6%, Britain 4.7% lower, Europe as a whole dropping 5.4%, and then to America, where the volatility was nausea-inducing till the market closed down 3.9%. Smiling, not singing, as rain soaked Shanghai and its stock market today in the worst shares rout since February 2007 or before the global financial crisis. China pedalled on regardless for years after the great global recession of 2008-9, but not anymore. Fears that China's economic approach, generating growth from debt-fueled investment, is about to run out of fuel has spooked markets, and Beijing was today unable to calm them.
The government believes they have a significant amount of control over China's economy. And to a certain extent, they even believe they can control the price of a stock. But you cannot, artificially manipulate market prices.
Over the past 35 years, the story of the world economy has really been the story of China, because from out of nowhere it became the world's second largest economy, contributing 15% of global GDP or income and 25%, that's a quarter of global growth. Now, because of its slowdown, the price of oil has tumbled back to levels we haven't seen since 2009. That's around $43 a barrel. And the price of raw materials in general have fallen back to where they were, believe it or not, in 1999, which is good news for most of us in the short term, because our money buys more petrol and food for less. But in the longer term, if China as the engine of the global economy decelerates or even grinds to a halt, we'll all be poorer. Mr. Money on Wall Street is anxious because the risks for companies of trading around the world have dramatically increased.
It means that these corporations that do a lot of business all over the world, currencies are moving around, commodities are going the wrong way. There's a lot of things they won't be able to sell to a lot of people.
But if this all sounds like bad news, if you have a big mortgage or debt in Britain, perhaps there's a silver lining.
Well, the consensus at the moment is that interest rates in the UK will rise probably in the first half of next year. And if anything, it will push interest rate rises out further into the future, say into the second half of 2016.
What powered China's growth in the years since we ran out of money in 2008 was a building and investment boom the likes of which the world has never seen, fueled by a dangerous lending boom. And today, global markets began to panic that what goes up will one day soon come down.
China's main index is down 9%. And friends, China is the world's second largest economy. And recent slowdowns in manufacturing and commodities, coupled with a weaker dollar, are behind the falls, according to John Sudworth.
China's stock market might be sinking fast, but there's little sign of public panic. On Beijing's canal today, the overriding view was that this is a bubble that needed to pop. The stock market's just like fishing, this man tells me. Sometimes you catch one, sometimes you don't. It's a reasonable view. China's share prices had been pumped so high over the past year and a half, partly through government encouragement, that the bull run simply had to end sometime. The trouble is, though, the adjustment has come at a time when China's real economy is facing strong headwinds. Exports fell steeply in July, factory orders are down, and the property industry is struggling. And that's why global markets are getting the jitters too. And there's something else. For weeks, China's leaders have been throwing everything they've got at trying to prop up the markets, but to no avail. If anything, panic is rising. China's Communist Party is learning the hard way about the limits of its ability to control its giant economy, and that's partly what's spooking the markets.
To a certain extent, they even believe they can control the price of a stock. But now, apparently the reality teach them, there is a market. They can't really, you can help improve or repair market efficiencies, but you cannot, artificially manipulate market prices.
And now Beijing's elderly fishermen have their part to play, albeit indirectly. For the first time, government pension funds are to be allowed to invest in the stock market. Once again, few analysts believe it will make much difference. John Sudworth, BBC News, Beijing.
My friends, in the news last night was the big story about the 3 Americans who became heroes while they were vacationing in France on board that French plane, that French train, I should say. And the French president, François Hollande, has awarded France's highest honor to the 4 men who prevented a suspected terror attack on that high-speed train to Paris from Amsterdam on Friday.
I'm quite emotional.
In your heart, how do you feel?
How do I feel? I feel happy to be alive. I mean, frankly, that was the real thing, and I'm happy that nobody got hurt.
2 days have passed. Has that altered your perspective on things at all?
No, not really. I think that I've taken a little bit of a step back to look at it, but to be honest, I think it's exactly the same. We're just really very, very, very lucky to be alive. And I think, from my point of view, I want to say thanks to my team members, Alex, Spence, Anthony. And I think that one way or another, we are going to be facing this kind of problem quite a few times in the future. And, I would invite you all to think about what do I do in that situation. Act if the opportunity presents itself. Obviously, you don't want to throw yourself in a situation that's completely hopeless, but act if you can. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you very much.
Now, that was British grandfather Chris Norman, along with U.S. servicemen Spencer Stone and 2 other Americans, Alec Scarlatus and Anthony Sadler, who were today presented with the Legion d'Honneur, the Legion of Honor medals at the LSE Palace. And as you heard Mr. Norman speaking, he said he felt very happy and lucky to be alive and thanked the other men who were involved. Now, friends, we're going to go to a report from the United States on the New York Stock Exchange as of 7 hours ago. Then at the end of tonight's program, we're going to give you an up to the minute report from around the globe on the stock markets affected by what happened today in China with its stock market and its 9% fall. First, U.S. markets are bordering on the edge of panic, according to a New York Stock Exchange floor trader. Stephen Gulful says there is uncertainty among traders about how quickly the Chinese economy is growing.
Bordering on the edge of panic, but not really quite there yet. I was here back in 1987. That was a much more dire feeling in the gut of our stomachs than what we got today. It was bad, and it could go there, but it's not there yet. Right now, there's fear pushing it one way. It's the global demand problem, and China is the engine of global demand. But China, we're not sure how fast their economy is growing right now. I don't think the PBOC is sure how fast China's economy is growing. And we're trying to price in that uncertainty. And you're seeing the market move in both directions rapidly at times. But right now, I think it's the global condition. It's the house of cards that has been set up by the central banks pricing credit artificially all this time. And the engine that is that growth that's just not there right now. So there's a lot of things that have to be repriced. And we're going through those pains.
All right, and friends, we are, as I said, going to have a global report up to the moment, right at the end of tonight's program. We will also be covering tonight the letter of protest out of Israel, and we'll be covering something that United States President Barack Obama has done against Israel just yesterday. That involves the Iran nuclear deal and his upset with Israel for trying to work against him in that. Now, we're going to cover next, though, several other stories, some from Europe that affect, a number of them from Europe that involve the migrant problem and situations that many countries in Europe are being exposed to and are having, and how that can help to fuel the situation where Europe comes together more solidly into a United States of Europe with 10 leaders who will then give their power to one dictator, one emperor, who will become, as the Bible calls it, the beast, who will revive the seventh and final revision of the Holy Roman Empire. It'll be the Holy Roman Empire because the Vatican will be involved. They'll send the Pope over to Frankfurt, Germany, to the Kaisersaal, second floor of the Romer building, where the Pope has held the coronation ceremony for many revived Holy Roman Emperor, and whose restoration of the Holy Roman Empire, second through the sixth Pope involved, and even involved on the first appointment of a Holy Roman Emperor for that empire. And let's cover this other news, though, because we got a lot of news tonight. Thousands more asylum seekers are expected to cross into the European Union via Hungary over the coming days. They've been able to reach Serbia after Macedonia abandoned forceful attempts to stop them at its border. Hungary's building a razor wire fence along its southern border, but 2,000 people a day are still crossing the incomplete barrier. Nick Thorpe reports.
This is one of the favourite routes for asylum seekers coming from Serbia into Hungary. Hundreds, thousands of people each day are coming this way up this track. It's rarely used by trains. When they get here, passing the barbed wire fence, which the Hungarians are just building, and then over here they're just having their first encounter with the Hungarian police.
About 1 kilometer.
1 kilometer checkpoint. Hungary. Okay.
So what we're seeing now is the Hungarian police effectively pointing the migrants on into Hungary, onto the police checkpoint further up the railway track. So even though the fence is being built here, the track runs through the middle of it, and people are free just to walk, for the time being anyway, on up into Hungary. Once they get a kilometre or so up the track, they will be met by more police and taken to a detention centre to be processed. After a certain period, perhaps only 24 hours, they will then be sent to a refugee camp in Hungary. That's when many people leave the country and try and carry on by train or by car or even on foot further to Austria, Germany or beyond.
First, we'll show you video in a moment of how one station in Hungary seems more like a refugee camp than it does a transport station. It's been described as Europe's worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. Here's mention of World War again related in the stories on this. More evidence emerges of how EU countries are struggling to cope with the influx of migrants. In eastern Germany, migrants housed in one center had to be protected by police after right-wing militants staged violent protest outside. In Italy, an estimated 4,000 migrants have been rescued from the Mediterranean and brought ashore over the weekend. And Hungary has seen more than 120,000 migrants travel through its capital, Budapest, so far this year, triple the numbers seen last year. Ed Thomas has this video report from Budapest.
It is the night train to Budapest. On board are the desperate, the tired, and the hungry. These people are from Afghanistan and Syria.
Come on.
To get this far, some have travelled through Iran, Turkey, Greece, and Serbia. And all of them need help. The migrants have overwhelmed Kaleti railway station. This year, 100,000 have made this journey. Many are exhausted. They need food and water. But even here, there's hope.
My wish, become doctor. My wish.
Zaina's wish, to be a doctor and save lives. Easy to understand after a life in Syria.
We die in Syria every day, many times. When the world sees this, what's happened? No anybody do anything.
Nobody listens.
This enough. Look, the babies, the children, this life.
It's not life.
Of course.
Kaleti station is now home to thousands of migrants. It feels like a refugee camp.
This could be King's Cross in London or Piccadilly Station in Manchester. And everywhere you look, the place is full of people from Syria, from Afghanistan, and more people are arriving every day. And it's clear that Hungary is struggling to cope.
So it's left to local volunteers to feed and clothe the migrants.
Now we get each day around 2,000 people over the border.
2,000 people coming every day?
Every day over the border to Hungary. It makes me feel ashamed of my country, because if you have a guest, it is all about you, how you handle your guest.
But the Hungarian government wants the migrants gone and is building a border fence to keep them out.
I see bomb blasting.
But some, like Meron from Afghanistan, say he and his family will never give up.
We are human beings, we are not animal.
And what do you want from your life?
I want freedom. I want nothing other.
But this journey to freedom is changing Kaleti station. And how many more people can it take? Ed Thomas, BBC News, Budapest.
And we have another video with Ed Thomas from Budapest reporting on details of that 110-mile-long fence that Budapest is building along its border with Serbia. And here's Ed Thomas again reporting from the border between Serbia and Hungary.
It is the longest of journeys, but it takes just seconds to cross the border from Serbia into Hungary.
About 1 kilometer.
1 kilometer checkpoint. Hungary. Okay.
Down these tracks, up to 2,000 people are coming every day. They've crossed continents, and it's taken weeks to get here.
20 days.
Yes. Syria, Turkey, Greece.
Ahmed is 14 and alone. He left Syria without his mother and father.
And where do you want to go to?
Go to Germany.
Germany?
Yes.
Why?
Why? ISIS.
ISIS.
In Syria.
In Syria.
War.
Do you think Germany wants you?
No.
No.
But Ahmed, like many others, won't stay in Hungary. The government here says it can't cope, so it's building this fence to keep the migrants out. Soon, it'll be 100 miles long.
This part of the fence is just coils and coils of barbed wire. It looks razor sharp, and this is the Hungarian government sending out
a clear message to the migrants. We don't want you here. But this border fence can't cross a railway line, and that means tension. Every day, these workers make the fence stronger, not just for the government, they say, but for themselves.
What should happen to the migrants?
He says the refugees should go back to where they came from. But for everyone here, reaching Hungary is reaching the European Union. Now, there are no borders. The Schengen Treaty means passport-free travel all the way to France. It is a European ideal under pressure like never before.
Will you ever give up? No. Will you ever give up? No. You'll never give up.
I ask from all the world to give these people a chance for pass to anywhere they want.
In Europe.
In Europe.
And with it, a chance to begin again. But how many more are heading this way to call Europe their home? Ed Thomas, BBC News, on the Hungarian-Serbia border.
Now, friends, I want to make an address to those of you who are watching live. For those of you who are watching by archived video, you won't be hearing the comments I'm going to make to those watching live. We'll just pick up in a moment with the next news story about a huge steel plant in Japan that broke out in fire. Where do you see that fire? A large fire has broken out at a steel plant near Haneda Airport, south of the Japanese capital, Tokyo. There have been no reports of injuries, say Japanese officials, but footage showed a massive plume of smoke rising from the scene in the city of Kawasaki and flames burning along the length of a building. And you can see what's going on there. Obviously, we have no audio commentary along with this. But again, this footage is showing a massive plume of smoke and now rising from the scene in the city of Kawasaki. Now you're seeing the flames burning along the length of a building and then coming out of the end of this building. And that's news from Japan. Now we go to Ukraine. For some more news, the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has been addressing a military parade in Kiev to mark the 24th anniversary of Ukraine's independence from Moscow. More than 2,000 soldiers took part in the ceremony in the heart of the capital, Kiev. In his speech, Mr. Poroshenko compared New Russia, the territory that pro-Russian troops want to create in eastern Ukraine, to Mordor, the fictional evil country in J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings books. David Stern reports.
This marks the 24th anniversary of Ukraine's declaration of independence. That was before the actual breakup of the Soviet Union. It was after the August attempted coup, but that's when the Ukrainians first announced that they were going to be independent. And obviously, this is a day of very great significance. We have the military parade, more than 2,000 soldiers taking part, but without major military hardware. Last year we saw some very significant hardware in the center of Kiev. That is not taking place right now, but we have been hearing from the President Petro Poroshenko, and he's also greeted is spoken to the soldiers, and later on in the day he will be traveling to Berlin to meet with the German and French leaders. The speech that he made touched on many topics. He said that the War of Independence is continuing, and he said that in the next year, the 25th year of independence, Ukraine must walk as if it's on thin ice. He said any false step could be fatal. At the same time, he spoke about Russian aggression, but he said there was no alternative to the peace process.
Yes, and he compared, I gather, Novo Russia, the new Russia, to Mordor, which is the fictional evil country in the Tolkien book Lord of the Rings.
He said that the Novorossiya was as fictional as that, that this was a made-up concept, and obviously this is a jab towards these two breakaway regions that are they're Moscow-supported insurgents. Of course, the Ukrainians say that Russian troops are also involved. They're actual regular Russian troops as opposed to Russian soldiers on leave, as the Russians say. Moscow denies this, but obviously the war of words, or the conflict of words, continues even on Independence Day.
And friends, last night we showed you video about the demonstrators against the piles of uncollected rubbish protests that are going on over in Beirut, Lebanon. And we have an update on that report for you tonight with the BBC's reporter there, Sophia Tran Thompson.
After weeks of unrest, the tension in Beirut has reached boiling point. Lebanese security forces have fired water, rubber bullets and tear gas at anti-government protesters. Projectiles and firecrackers have been thrown back. For weeks, rubbish has been piling up in the streets of Beirut. The trash crisis began last month when the main landfill site for the capital was closed, with no ready alternative. Collection has now resumed in some parts, but no long-term solution has been found. The government's failure to resolve the garbage crisis has highlighted wider problems the state faces. The underlying issue fueling the protests is Lebanon's political paralysis. Lebanon has been without a president since May last year, as MPs have been unable to decide on a suitable candidate and dismissed calls for an election. The cabinet has been hampered by sectarian rivalries that have been exacerbated by wider crises in the Middle East, including the war in neighbouring Syria. Lebanon's Prime Minister Tamam Salam has called the trash issue the straw that broke the camel's back and threatened to resign. He says the country faces collapse if key decisions are not agreed on soon, and that there is no money to pay the salaries of a large number of public sector employees. Should Prime Minister Salam resign, it would trigger a constitutional crisis. In Lebanon, the Prime Minister is appointed by the President, but the presidency has been vacant since Michel Suleiman's term ended over a year ago, and replacing the President requires a deal many say can only be brokered by Iran and Saudi Arabia. For now, the government's immediate focus is on the protests in the centre of Beirut. Human Rights Watch says police have failed to uphold human rights standards. And the Prime Minister has vowed to bring to account officials responsible for excessive use of force. Sophia Tran Thompson, BBC News.
Friends, in a moment I'm going to show you video with British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond, who we showed you in video last night, traveled to Iran for the opening of the British Embassy there in Iran, the reopening of the British Embassy in Iran. Today he met with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. And, you know, friends, you people in government, a lot of us really wish you would pay attention to history, because history repeats itself, and you learn the lessons of history. You know, the British Prime Minister who went to see Germany's Nazi leader Hitler and came back reporting to the British people, oh, we got a deal struck with Hitler, peace, peace. And how naive that was, because it was only months later the bombs began to drop on London in huge numbers nightly from Germany. And, you know, it's almost like a repeat of history with what Britain now is trying to do with Iran. And the United States, unbelievable, the United States leading the way in that. Don't we learn lessons from history? Don't we really learn? We're super naive and we're not listening to our greatest ally over in the Middle East, Israel. We've got the letter tonight that we'll be reporting on that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had one of his ministers write as a letter of protest to the West. We'll be covering that toward the end of the program tonight. But Britain believes it's right to work towards good relations with Iran, but should read carefully, the Foreign Secretary said. I'm sorry, not read carefully, should tread carefully. Despite a deep legacy of distrust, Iran is too important a player to leave isolated, Philip Hammond said. Well, he told the BBC Radio 4 Today that he believes the two countries could also work together to tackle the Islamic State group. Mr. Hammond held talks with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani in Tehran, as you'll see in this video in just a moment. He said sanctions could be lifted next spring, according to a Reuters report. We could be talking as early as next spring to start to see sanctions lifting off, Mr. Hammond said, according to the news agency. Here's the video.
Tehran is bustling, energetic, rigid in some ways, but surprisingly relaxed and approachable compared to some big Arab cities. What is hard for a foreigner here is working out where the power lies. Britain's Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, had an audience with President Rouhani, who told him he was pleased Britain and Iran now had embassies in each other's capitals. Mr. Rouhani is president, but he's not Iran's most powerful man. That is Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader. He's given Mr. Rouhani a license to make the nuclear deal and to welcome some foreigners. But in a recent speech, he also pledged he'd keep corrupting foreign influences out of Iran, which pleases hardliners. And then Mr. Hammond saw another extremely powerful Iranian, Admiral Ali Shamkhani, who's Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, considered by many to be Iran's most influential body. Mr. Hammond left with a lot to think about to visit the Commonwealth War Cemetery, which is in the grounds of a 39-acre British compound in North Tehran. Thousands of British and Commonwealth troops are buried or commemorated here. It might have been simpler for the British when they were the dominant imperial power in Iran. Now, like all foreigners, they have to navigate their way through a non-stop battle for influence between competing parts of the system.
We need to be able to see Iran as a conventional state with a government that controls the state, a foreign policy which is about protecting its national interests. We can deal with a country like that even when we don't agree with those policies.
But it's not that kind of country yet, is it? And surely you're not asking them to change their whole system.
The system is built in a different way. I think we have to make a judgment about the impact that the nuclear deal will have on the future.
So the British have declared themselves satisfied with what they've heard here in Iran. Of course, there are important Western allies, notably the Saudis and the Israelis, as well as powerful voices in the US who say that hoping the Islamic Republic of Iran will ever change for the better is naive and dangerous. But if things turn out the way the British hope in this country, it will add up to a major strategic change, and that will alter a great deal in the Middle East. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Tehran.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy Bowen. Friends, next I have a report from yesterday's news that's, I want to read to you. It's entitled, "Is Obama Trying to Shame Israel?" While it flew somewhat under the radar of the mainstream news cycle, the Obama administration last week apparently tried to shame Israel into supporting its dangerous Iran nuclear deal by declassifying historic documents regarding the Jewish state's own nuclear program. Many saw it as no accident that the Nixon-era state documents were made public just as Israel is leading the charge to have Obama's Iran nuclear agreement defeated in Congress. The release of the 1,100-page official report, which covers meetings from 1969 and 1969 through 1976, would seem to be an effort to draw moral equivalency between Israel and Iran, and between America's approach to both nations' respective nuclear programs. Most notably, a July 19, 1969 memorandum from then National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger to President Richard Nixon outlined the proposed approach to Israel and highlighted disagreement between the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Department of Defense, and State Department on what demands to present to the Jewish state. All involved agreed that Israel must be made to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Everyone agreed that, as a minimum, we want Israel to sign the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is not because signing will make any difference in Israel's actual nuclear program, because Israel could produce warheads clandestinely, the memo said. Israel's signature would, however, give us a publicly feasible issue to raise with the Israeli government, a way of opening the discussion. It would also publicly commit Israel not to acquire nuclear weapons. The Joint Chiefs of Staff felt that if Israel's program becomes known, we should be in a position to say we did everything in our power to prevent Israel from going nuclear. While government, people in government, they want to play deception. They wanted to try to be able to say they did everything they could to prevent Israel from going nuclear, while the Department of Defense felt that we could live with the existence of Israeli nuclear weapons, provided they were not deployed. Duh. The State Department, meanwhile, believed we should try to keep Israel from going any further with its nuclear weapons program. It may be so close to completion that Israel would be willing and make a record for ourselves of having tried. The Obama White House claimed the release of those documents that reported those things I just read to you, friends, was routine declassification that just happened to coincide with the debate over the Iran deal. But many say it's even more cause for concern that the Obama administration and the West intend to do very little to actually stop Iran from attaining nuclear weapons. The content of the documents would suggest that, just as it did with Israel, when Iran goes nuclear, the White House will simply throw up its hands and say, "We tried." Except Iran isn't Israel, and trying to subtly draw moral equivalence between the two again demonstrates for many the moral bankruptcy of America's policies. And then, friends, we'll probably keep that same slide up while I read you what I promised to read you toward the end of our program. The Israel letter of protest to the West, where they say your partner Iran attacked us. Now what? Israel's foreign ministry has dispatched an official letter of protest to Western countries that signed the nuclear agreement with Iran regarding the Iran-ordered attack on Israel on Thursday of last week. By direct order of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's foreign minister has dispatched an official letter of protest to the Western countries that signed the nuclear agreement with Iran regarding the Iran-ordered attack on Israel on Thursday. 4 rockets were fired from Syrian facilities Thursday evening, hitting areas in the northern Galilee and the Golan Heights. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but this was an indiscriminate terrorist attack planned in advance with no prior Israeli provocation, the letter states. Israel informed the Western powers that it has reliable information that this attack was carried out by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, ordered directly by the Iranian terrorist Saeed Izzati of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. The letter further states, "This is further clear indication of Iran's increasing involvement in attacks against Israel in particular, and against regional targets in general. The ink on the nuclear agreement has not yet dried, and this attack shows clearly how Iran plans to act the moment after the international sanctions are removed." End quote. Israel attributes responsibility to the Western powers led by the United States. The international community, headed by those who signed on the deal, cannot allow Iran to attain international and political legitimacy, even as it continues to act directly and actively in terrorist attacks throughout the Middle East. End quote. In conclusion, Israel demands that the countries that signed with Iran now intervene against Iran's increasing belligerence. Israel eliminated the four-man Islamic Jihad terror cell responsible for the attack on Friday morning, striking them as they were in a vehicle 10 to 15 kilometers from the Syrian border. Defense Minister Moshe Ya'ayan Likud of the Likud Party added details of the rocket attack last night. Quote, "Following the signing of the nuclear deal with Iran and the removal of the sanctions, what we saw here with this attack is liable to be a preview to a more wealthy and more murderous Iran, which will funnel much money and arms to terrorist organizations to harm Israel and Western interest. This is Iran's intent, and the West had better not sweep this fact under the rug. The attack against Israel was carried out by a terrorist cell activated, sponsored, and armed by Iran. It took place from within territory controlled by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, to whom we also attribute responsibility. Iran, via the Al-Quds force and its emissaries in Syria and Lebanon, is trying to open a terror front against Israel from the Syrian Golan, and is smuggling arms and training terror cells to this end. We will not tolerate attempts to violate Israel's sovereignty or harm the security of its citizens, and we will respond firmly and strongly against all who challenge us." Now, friends, I promised you that I would close tonight with a video showing the global impact of China's slowdown. Hundreds of billions of dollars have been wiped off stock markets around the world. BBC correspondents explain the global impact of China's economic slowdown.
Anyone who owns shares could lose out, including people who want to cash in their pensions and find they're not worth so much. On the other hand, drivers could benefit, the economic worries helping to push down the price of fuel. And home buyers could find that the cost of mortgages stays lower for longer if the Bank of England is prompted by the uncertainty to put off a much anticipated rise in interest rates.
Until recently, most ordinary Indians have avoided the stock markets like the plague. Instead, it's typically been gold and property that have been seen as the most sensible places to invest. But with neither of those offering reliable returns in the last few years, we have been seeing more people move towards the markets, especially investing in mutual funds. These are funds which are invested both in Indian and international shares, and so as those markets plummet, the value of savings of people here are also falling.
The immediate impact of the market volatility will be felt by those who are importing goods into the South African economy, those bringing in things such as machinery, clothing and textiles, for instance. It may also be felt by those who are in the tourism sector buying airline tickets and packaged holidays priced in dollars. Because South Africa is a net importer of petrol and food, the average person will start to feel it as they fill up their cars at the petrol pump or buy food at a supermarket.
So why should Americans care about all this market volatility? Well, big falls on financial markets affect all kinds of investments, and especially pension funds. So it really depends on where you are in life. If you're far from retirement, then you don't have as much to worry about because you're playing the long game. But if you've already retired or are close to retirement, then you may be more concerned. That said, the last 4 years of a bull market would have hopefully given many people somewhat of a cushion.
Here in Brazil, bad news in international markets, particularly China, are terrible news for average Brazilians. The Chinese are huge buyers of Brazilian commodities, such as iron ore and soybeans. Some of these commodity prices are precisely the ones that are tumbling down right now, and it has the potential to hurt Brazilian firms and jobs.
And friends, that's it for our Monday night edition of Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Tuesday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.